You're listening to The White Rabbit, conversations on the art of presenting in a rather noisy world. Your hosts are Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. Matt helps leaders of international companies speak, write, and present with confidence. Alper is a communications trainer and a startup investor with a diverse portfolio of companies in Barcelona. If you like this podcast, please share it with friends and colleagues. Now, on to Matt and Alper for today's conversation.
Alper, I have something that I want to run by you today, and that is, well, let me back up a second. I tend to use podcasts kind of to help me fall asleep, and my wife has referred to them as
Likewise.
lullabies.
Yeah.
So, and I before the podcast, I couldn't remember the name of the one I'm using now, but now I'm remembering it. It's Smartless. It has absolutely nothing to do with anything business related, and the podcasts last for a little bit over an hour, but I've never heard more than 10 or 15 minutes of it because I just use it to fall asleep. So I listen to it. I'm a regular listener, but I've never actually heard a full episode. And
Do you repeat the same episode on different
oh
nights?
yeah, oh yeah, because it doesn't matter. I think I don't even know how often they make new episodes. I think it's probably about once every 2 weeks, but it doesn't really even matter because I can't even hear the voices. I set it on the lowest volume and I put it on the nightstand next to the bed, and so I can't even hear what they're saying basically. So if they just kept
But it
repeating the
helps to
same
fall
episode
asleep.
over and yeah, it helps me fall asleep. If they kept repeating the same episode over and over, I probably wouldn't even notice. And
Okay.
before that one, before Smartless, it was another podcast that you and I are both really big fans of, the Two Bobs podcast with David C. Baker and Blair Enns. And sometimes during the day, I'll listen to that podcast for real. But for a while, I was also using it as a lullaby.
Lullaby?
Yeah, to help me fall asleep. I
I'm
use that
sure
word
they would be
lullaby.
proud.
Yeah, they would be proud of that. I use that word lullaby because my wife laughs and tells me that I'm using podcasts as a lullaby. And in fact, it to the point where the opening jingle for that podcast actually puts me to sleep. I'm like a Pavlov's dog. As soon as I hear
Yeah,
that
you're
opening jingle,
conditioned.
I start falling asleep. I'm totally conditioned. Some years before that, and this is a while ago, so this would be back in 2016, I think, something like that. So a while back, I was using a recording of a podcast episode with this guy Orrin Claff, and who we've mentioned once before in one previous episode on this podcast. We mentioned him by name, and we both kind of ragged on him because he and I have very different styles. He's kind of a fly around the world on my big airplane doing these big deals, and that is so not Matt's style. So, but the ideas that he talks about, they're really good ideas. So I wanted to run one of them by you today. So anyway, my point is that I listened to this podcast. The reason that this comes up today is that I listened to this podcast probably like 100 times in 2016 or more than 100 times in 2016. And then it totally went dark. And then all of a sudden, for some reason that I don't understand at all, about 2 weeks ago, I started quoting from this podcast. And so anyway, I wanted to take one of the ideas that he talks about in the book, Win Without Pitching, the book. And he also talks about that same idea in this podcast. And I wanted to run it by you and get your opinion on it. Are you ready for that?
Okay.
Okay.
Just to clarify, this is something that Oren talks about in the book, this
Yeah,
idea?
it's an idea that he talks about in the book, and he also talks about it in the podcast. So he's talking about this same idea in two places.
Okay.
And the idea is prizing and not accepting lower status. And in his world, he's
Pricing with a Z, if I understand correctly.
prizing with a Z, not prizing with a C, but prizing with a Z, as in to win a prize. And since his world is pitching investors for money, prizing, in his case, involves a fair amount of emotional detachment from money. And so he talks about one thing I found very interesting that he talks about is that money is a commodity. We as humans, we tend to kind of worship it and think, whether you're asking for $1 million or $100 million or $1 billion or whatever, we tend to think of that amount of money as the prize, and we worship that amount of money. And we walk into a meeting or walk into a presentation thinking that if we do everything perfect, then maybe the king will see fit to give us this chunk of money. And
Okay.
so the pressure is all on us. And Warren Claff says that this is not the right way to think of it. He says that money is everywhere. Money is a commodity. It's like rice or wheat or oil or something like that. It's a commodity. It's everywhere. It's in your pocket. It's in your friend's pocket. It's in the wall. It's in the cash register. Money is everywhere. Money is worthless. However, there is just one you, and there is just one idea, whatever that idea is, that you are pitching. And so you need to recognize that that idea and you are the most valuable thing in the room. The person sitting across from you, the person watching your presentation, the person making the yes or no decision about whether to give this presenter the $100 million or not, that is not the most valuable position in the room. The most valuable position is the space that you occupy and the idea that you are presenting. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think about that? And you and I, we're both big fans of Blair Enns and the Win Without Pitching book. You are a slightly bigger fan of it than I am, or a more regular reader of it than I am. So I wanted to ask you, what do you think of this idea? And if you run it through the Win Without Pitching filter, what do you get?
Can I not run it through the win without pitching filter and go ahead with my
Yeah,
own?
sure. Go ahead with your own filter, whatever you like.
Okay. Okay. I have sat at both sides of that table as a
Okay,
pitcher and as a pitchy, let's say, as an investor listening to pitches.
sure.
And I wouldn't think of it in binary terms as in, okay, who is the most important person in the room? Is it the
Okay.
investor handing out the money? Is it the pitching person trying to get that money? I think it can change from one moment to the next.
Okay.
And I think walking into the room, believing in any of those two scenarios, like he is the most important or I am the most important, I think it would be dangerous because it might prevent you from doing a live reading of the room as you speak to that
Mm-hmm.
person.
Oh, okay.
I agree. I agree to a certain point that money is abundant and is everywhere, and
Oh,
you know, the next person will have also an investment to share with you. But I
oh,
also believe in the fact that between the two scarce resources that the investor has and let's call him or her a startup entrepreneur has, uh, it's not that abundant for the startup, because if it were that abundant, I don't think they would be pitching in the first place.
okay.
If they are pitching in the first place, it's, in my opinion, it automatically means that they're looking for it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it wouldn't put everyone on equal terms, and it certainly would not put them as definitely advantageous over the other.
So let me see if I'm hearing you correctly. So it sounds to me like you're saying neither of those are the right way to think about it. The first way, the straw man, the one that Orrin Claff is knocking down, the way that says, "Thank you for giving me your time. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you." That is not the right way to think about it. But you're also saying that the Orrin Claff way of "I am the valuable one. I am more valuable than you." That is also not the right way to think about it. Is that what you're saying?
I think yes and no. And let me dig a little
Oh,
deeper into that.
okay.
Through the window without pitching lens, I think filter, not the lens, from the window without pitching filter. I believe in the book there was a proclamation about feeling how you are the prize to be won. These are not my words; these are
Mm-hmm.
words directly from the book. And I think it's
Okay.
important that you walk into that conversation with that mindset.
I'm
But
sorry.
I think you would
Back up a second. Which mindset? Walk into the presentation
that
or
you
walk into the meeting
that
with.
you are the price to be won.
Oh,
Like, you're
okay.
not
Okay.
begging for work, you're not begging for investment, you're not begging for mercy from the investor or the client if you're pitching for a service
Okay.
for a collaboration. I completely agree with the idea that it would be the right mindset to think that you are the prize to be won. At the same time, I think it should carry a certain level of humility with it, in case you walk into that room with that mindset, and it's possible that you will be shut down in 2 seconds, and then there will be nothing to talk further.
Okay.
So I think, I mean, I understand how we may be inclined to want to put things in boxes,
Mhm.
like thinking ones and zeros, and say, okay, who is the most important person? Who is the prize in the room? Is it me or you?
Mhm.
I don't think there is any way to say with 100% certainty whether one is more valuable than the other without exception. I think it would be dangerous to assume any of those scenarios.
Okay.
I think the bigger perspective would be to look at things from a mutually beneficial point of view,
Mhm.
whether you're pitching to acquire the services of a company, or not the services, the business of a client, or you're looking forward to acquiring the investment, the money of an investor. I think it would be more beneficial to try to find a common ground, to try to find a common goal. And I think
Mhm.
in the book, Win Without Pitching, this is referred to as the fit, trying to find a perfect fit between
Okay.
you and the other person, and
Sure.
shape the conversation around that fit rather than thinking, hey, I'm more valuable, so I command the power in this room. Yeah, what if you're not actually? What if you're mistaken to think that you're more valuable? You enter the room thinking that
Mm.
you're more valuable, you shape the conversation around that, and you get shut down in 30 seconds, and that's the end of the
Yeah.
conversation. If you're
Interesting.
telling me that as an entrepreneur you have 30 more investors lined up, filled with FOMO, fear of missing out, and who are
Mhm.
ready to flash their checkbook and invest in your company, if you tell me that, of course that would be, we will be talking about a different situation. But
Mhm.
unless you have a pipeline filled with people who are looking forward to working with you or investing in your company, I think it would be grossly dangerous to assume that you have
Mm.
the power to command the idea that you're the prize to be won and you're more valuable than the other person.
Okay. So let me see if hearing you correctly. So these two books, the Warren Claff Pitch Anything book and the Blair Enns Win Without Pitching book, they sound like they would be coming from completely different perspectives, but actually they seem to be sharing a lot of common ground. However, what
They
you're
do,
pointing
yes.
out, what you're pointing out though is kind of a third way, which is, hey, Warren Claff and Blair Enns, calm down a little bit. Don't get all these people all pumped up to walk in there thinking they're all awesome. You might need to take it down a notch and remember that this is more of a mutual situation than these two books might be guiding you towards. Is that what you're saying?
To be fair, I may have read the Pitch Anything book, but I don't remember it well enough to
Mm-hmm.
quote or um, not to be fair. To be fair, I don't think
Sure.
that's the sensation from Without Pitching. I think it's more leaning towards finding that common ground. I don't think it is. I mean, in my understanding, it's not telling the person to feel so empowered that he or she is going to see himself or herself as the most valuable person in the room. For
Mm-hmm.
all I know, I mean, the book is aptly named. For all I know, they're against pitches and they're against these experiences where they stand up in front of another person and try to pitch themselves. They're all for having a conversation. And I think
Mm-hmm.
during that conversation, yes, of course, you should comment power, you should comment authority and everything, but I don't think they are anywhere in the book, or he is anywhere in the book advocating the idea that you're the most valuable person in the room. If he is, then
Oh, okay.
I am grossly mistaken in my perception of the book itself.
Yeah, we should get him on the podcast one of these days and find
Yeah,
out
just to
if we are
clarify that. Yeah,
understanding him as correctly as we hope we are.
yeah.
So anyway, so we've got to wrap it up for today. So thank you very much for your feedback, Alper,
Thank
and
you.
I will talk to you next week then.
Take care. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to The White Rabbit with Matt Krause and Alper Rosanes. You can subscribe to the podcast on Spotify, iTunes, or through your favorite feed.